Well, hello everyone. I apologize for my appearance. But you see, when you're a memory, you turn into a bit of a shadow. So today I thought I'd fill in some of the murky details of my own moment in time. Because every man has his moment, and I was a man like any man, where every moment counts. And this is my account. Here's my story. My mother, Charlotte Moss, was born in Syracuse, New York, and had deep roots in the local Jewish community. She was named after the first Charlotte Moss, the first wife of her father, Emanuel Moss. A prosperous businessman, he emigrated from England in 1845. A devout Jew, he was one of the earliest members of Solomon Rosenblum's Orthodox Adath Jeshurun Shul. Back in the 1860s, that was the congregation that split from the Reform practices of Temple Concord.
I was only 5 years old when Father passed away, so I'm afraid my memories of him are rather vague. The only thing I do recall is Mother saying he was an eccentric sort, disappearing for months on end.
Charlotte's mother was the widow Fanny Silverman, a formidable presence indeed, who never spared the rod.
Father already had 5 children from his previous marriage, a boy and 4 girls who were my half-sisters. When my parents married, Fanny was 32 and Emanuel 69. After the age of 70, Father produced 2 more children, myself and my little brother Morton. I was a strong-willed, fun-filled girl. Always was and always would be. I was a magnet for attention. Always was and always would be.
I was born in Neustadt, Germany, during a time of great uncertainty for Jews. At the age of 7, my parents Samuel and Deborah packed me off to America. I traveled with 2 older boys from my village. Steerage was an unpleasant experience, but even with the smells and sickness, it was a grand adventure for a young boy. In 1901, I arrived, just another foreigner in a foreign land. We journeyed to Syracuse, where I lived with my mother's brother, my Uncle Simon Silverman, and his wife Aunt Sophia. I never saw my own family again.
My father was a quiet, cultured man. An accomplished violinist and composer, he performed with the Syracuse Symphony, and the sounds of his talents were a constant presence in our household.
My half-sisters had all married very wealthy men. And let me tell you, in those days, Izzy Lurie was also quite a catch. He was a pharmacist, almost a doctor. Kind, gentle, and so easygoing. So easy. Oh, 1916 was a very good year.
Back in 1918, the announcement of my birth was greeted with great fanfare. I was a jazz-age baby with all the trimmings.
A doctor, a lawyer, a president. Ah, my beautiful baby boy. Four years later, the Lurie family was complete when our daughter Elaine arrived.
My mother was a very young person, always acted young, like to be one of the girls' friends. She was a great cook, and she was a real good mother. She always worried about me.
I think what I admired most about my father was his intellectual capacity, his dedication to reading and studying the science of medicine. Reading and studying. That sounded pretty good.
So, I must tell you about my little brother Morton. He was always a hellraiser, and it was just like him to talk his way into the Army at the age of 16. During World War I, he's slashing through the battlefields on that damn motorcycle, delivering messages. Well, this time he got himself into some real trouble, losing both his legs in a horrible accident. While recuperating in the hospital, he taught himself these sleight-of-hand magic tricks that so impressed my son.
I could never get enough of my Uncle Mort or magic.
He was full of fun. He loved magic. He used to do a lot of magic tricks and play with cards and fool the people. He always laughed a lot.
Our little family lived on Kenmore Ave on the city's south side. Jewish people were scarce in this part of town.
We lived near a park, and all the kids around the park picked on him, and he wasn't a fighter, so I would stick up and tell him to leave my brother alone, or I'd go home and tell my mother.
Izzy owned a pharmacy just a few blocks away on Salina Street. It was a casual neighborhood destination, with his friends frequently stopping by to chew the fat. With Mom helping out behind the counter, the Lurie pharmacy was a family affair.
He had a soda fountain, and he had plenty of ice cream cones given out to people. And he was that type of a man that if I brought any of my friends, he gave them ice cream sundaes and everything.
The corner of Lafayette and Salina was the center of our childhood.
Those Depression years were tough. Between the bread lines and the bank runs, there was an epidemic of misery out there, but I tightened up our purse strings and pulled us through. There were some who called me cheap, but I called it smart. We kept our heads above water until my husband's better nature got in the way.
We were a little South Side store, and my customers were my neighbors and friends. So many were struggling to make ends meet. How could I deny them their medicines? I kept extending credit until it drove my business under. And by 1933, I had to declare bankruptcy and close up shop.
So, our financial situation also meant pulling up stakes and selling our Kenmore Avenue residence, which wasn't a bad thing, since we were moving across town to the East Side Westcott neighborhood, a popular destination for many other Jews who were migrating out of their old 15th Ward district near downtown. Home was now an upper flat on Westmoreland Ave, where Iz made a living filling in as a freelance pharmacist around Syracuse. We thought the change of location would also benefit our children.
They wanted me to be near Jewish people.
I finished up high school at Central Tech with honors. Next stop was Syracuse University, where I was majoring in chemistry, the first step in becoming a doctor. While going to school, I was employed as a stock boy at Walgreens, where I befriended a coworker, Bertha Freeman, who wanted to introduce me to her little sister, Irene. I'd already had a few girlfriends, well, dates mostly. With so much studying, I had little time for a social life. And besides, for me, a calculus equation was easier to figure out than a girl. But I figured if this Irene was as beautiful as her sister, I had to give it my best shot.
When Bertha first introduced us, I have to admit I wasn't that impressed. Ernie was way too chatty, laughing and making with the jokes.
I was nervous as all hell.
He picked me up in his mother's car, which proceeded to break down. So instead of a movie, we spent a couple of hours cooling our heels in a gas station. Given time, Ernie calmed down, and the less he tried to impress me, the more I liked him. He was handsome and a boy with prospects. It didn't take long for us to become an item. I grew up on Cedar Street in the Syracuse Jewish neighborhood of the 15th Ward. My parents were immigrants from Europe, Harry Freeman and Sarah Lucerne. Whenever you'd ask them where they came from, they'd just say, Russia, Poland. My maternal grandparents, Molly and Rabbi Elias Lucerne, never emigrated from Europe. It's not known what became of them. Mama arrived in America New Year's Eve 1904. Her sister Bertha had already blazed a trail to Syracuse and was married to the Reverend Abraham Fine, a pillar of the Syracuse Jewish community. Harry was one of 6 Freeman brothers, all mostly involved in the meat business. They were farmers, grocers, butchers, or a cattle dealer like Pa. I would often accompany him to the slaughterhouse, a harrowing experience for a little girl. Once they were settled in America, the brothers brought over their parents, Monash and Sarah. In our house, there were more people than beds, so you never knew where or who you'd be sleeping with, except my brother Irving, who always slept with Pa. Our mother was much more observant than our father, who liked to tease her by blasting Goyish services broadcast on the radio.
Tell me the story of Jesus.
Ma was full of Rahmanas. There were always a few scraps for any poor soul who came tapping at the door. I guess I should mention that back at Madison Junior High, the school paper was assigning song titles to kids, and for me they chose Lovely to Look At. What do you think? By the time I met Ernest, I was already enrolled in the Marinello School of Beauty. I just loved making things pretty, and of course, being pretty.
Our little world, so shiny and bright. But what kind of world was this, with a web of fear and hate spreading across Europe? My 4th year of school would just have to wait. It was a time for looking beyond your own little life in your own little world. A time for sacrifice. A time for duty. A time for action. So on September 10th, 1941, I enlisted in the United States Army.
I did not have a peaceful night's sleep the entire time he was in the Army.
When we first showed up at Fort Niagara, we were a bunch of foolish kids playing at soldier. Fun and games, but not for long.
By the early 40s, my family had also moved to the Westcott area, and I was working downtown as a hairdresser at the Powder Puff Beauty Salon. I'd race home every day and eagerly read about Ernie's latest adventures.
That's me on the left, firing the automatic Browning rifle. It spits 20 bullets in a couple of seconds and is as vicious as a machine gun. Here's a real action picture. It's unposed and I'm shooting from the kneeling position. It was just after mail call and I hadn't received any mail, while Tom Duffy had. Consequently, my sad expression. That's me getting ready to fire the first shot of the day on our 37mm gun. You can see these are regular folding cots, no springs. Taken out in front of our barracks, we're around the only soft shoulders in camp.
When Ernie finally came home on leave, he'd been promoted to a first lieutenant, and an infantry commander at that.
He was so handsome in that uniform. By this point, all the gals had fellas in the service. Before he went overseas, we got engaged. I was never happier or more worried.
On November 1st, 1943, I was ordered to report to Fort Meade, Maryland. Now the real work began. First stop was North Africa and Oran, Algeria. A year earlier, the Allies' Operation Torch had cleared out the occupying Vichy French forces. Now it was just a staging area, a place you awaited further orders. In the harbor, you could still see the ships scuttled by the French Navy, keeping them out of the hands of the Germans and Italians. As we reached the shore, the tension in our landing craft was electric. All those fresh young faces, wondering who would come home a hero or not at all. It was a strange new world. We weren't in Kansas anymore, or Westmoreland Ave.
Oh my, those love notes from Ernie were something special. My soldier boy was some smooth talker. I think my girlfriends, Alice Featherstone and Ruth Fox, were a little jealous.
Irene was a lovely girl.
We were just like girlfriends.
Shopping, eating, talking.
Supporting one another.
I saw a lot of action during the Italian campaign of 1944. That brought me to the ancient Monte Cassino Abbey that stood high atop a valley. Although considered off-limits because of its historic stature, the Germans were playing peekaboo from the heights, observing our troops. It took 4 treacherous assaults, and finally, 55,000 Allied deaths later, Polish bombers fumigated the Nazi pests from the premises. Afterwards, it was hard to tell who won what. And then it was off to that beach in Anzio. Welcome to Hell's Playground. For almost 5 months, the Krauts pummeled us until we finally broke through. Yes, the liberation of Italy was a joyful thing, but freedom has a toll, and the cost is seeing your buddies blown away in the blink of an eye. But you just kept pushing on. Don't stop, don't think. Surrender to fear, and you were kaput, blotto, a statistic. So you just kept pushing on. August 15th, 1944, an Operation Dragoon. 7 weeks after D-Day, a mission designed to clean up the Huns' hideaways in southern France. We hit the beach hard in Saint-Tropez, when out of nowhere, mortar fire. I was thrown on my face, a searing pain in my left leg, numb, fading in and out of consciousness. My military career was over.
Christmas Eve, 1944, and we were quelling, and not because it was Christmas Eve. Tomorrow, after 3 long years, our son Ernest was finally coming home from the war.
Iz woke up the next morning, gasping for breath, in great pain. He was fading fast.
He mentioned that he would never see Ernest, and it just turned out that unfortunately he didn't make it in time.
We were all crushed.
The love of my life, my partner, was gone. A widow at 50. And left with barely any resources. Well, to hell with bad luck. I was still very much that strong-willed girl. And my will was stronger than fate.
3 weeks later, Ernie and I were married and headed to a military hospital in Walla Walla, Washington. He was on crutches, and we were very concerned that, like his Uncle Mort, he could lose a limb. Ernie had severe nerve damage in his foot and shrapnel in his leg, which required delicate surgery.
Oh boy, what a way to spend our honeymoon. 9 months in and out of the Macaw Military Hospital. I was inspected and dissected, x-rayed and filleted. Fortunately, after a couple of operations, they put me back together again. To whom it may concern, I was a civilian again. As Irene and I headed back east, we learned
the war was over, and the world was ours.
For the next few years, every winter, Elaine and I vacationed in Florida. We were searching for some fun and sun, and let's be honest, men. After all, I still had my figure. And what's a few years here and there when you're talking about age? I was dating again to this man, Ben something or other, who turned out to be a real mashugana once I found out he had made a pass at my beautiful daughter. Oh well, but I wasn't concerned. There were plenty of other coconuts out there in the trees.
my mother was now living in a flat on East Fayette Street, and when Irene and I returned from the coast, we lived with her there.
My mother-in-law had always been a bit possessive of Ernie. And now, under the same rooftop, this girlfriend of mine had turned into a rival. My sisters were already settling homes and having babies, and that was my desire too.
Irene wanted me to finish college. But after what I saw and did during the war, schoolwork seemed so irrelevant. So instead, I concentrated on a career in business. I studied everything I could find, from Reader's Digest sales pitches and the ins and outs of advertising, to tips on the power of influence from Dale Carnegie. It was at Wilson's Jewelers where I first plied my trade. When it came to magic, I was just a big kid. Even when I was in the hospital recuperating, I was ordering tricks, like this floating cigarette gag. I would spend hours in front of the mirror practicing my sleight of hand technique. Abracadabra, alakazam, and all that jazz.
Ernie was the life of any party, always with his pocket full of laughs, gags, and tricks. He got a lot of mileage out of that Hitler mask.
Yeah, that was me all right. Old laughing, smiling, life of the party Ernie. Oh, I sure could talk that talk. Wherever I worked, that laughing, smiling, talking routine sold a lot of furniture. At Franklin's, Raymore's, and Goldberg's. How can I help you today?
Remember that business about other coconuts in the trees? Well, one day while I was waiting for a bus on East Fayette Street, one fell right into my lap. Actually, my coconut was a gentleman from Utica, Sidney Alexander, who pulled up and he asked me if I needed a ride. He was kind, gentle, and oh so easygoing. Easy for me.
And they became friends, and she ended up marrying him. He was a wonderful man, and he loved my mother so much, but he looked like an older man because he had high black shoes on. And she dressed him up, and she put on low black shoes and dressed him like a young person. He looked 10 years younger after she got rid of him, fortunately. It's about 15 years difference in age. My mother and Sidney went to Florida together, and they stayed at a hotel. It's like a honeymoon. They had a good time. Just like a father to me. He says, I don't want you to call me Dad because I'm not your dad. Just call me Sidney because nobody can replace a dad. I always remember that when my mother remarried.
Our first place together on West Onondaga, where we had Sheila.
And Sheila wasn't the only one teething. You see, Terry was our first child. And with the new arrival, he just wanted to make sure he was still in the picture. Our little carriage house was big on joy, and everyone wanted a piece of it. Well, almost everyone.
Then an upper on Westmoreland, where we had Irwin.
Sheila and Irwin, ain't they cute? Walking all around in their matching suits. A Rudy toot toot, Sheila and Irwin, what a hoot.
Finally, in 1949, we bought this house at 300 Thurber Street. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, 4 kids, no room.
Boom, baby, boom. Jay in 52 and Janice in 59.
It was Howdy Doody and Uncle Walt, birthday cakes and Monopoly fights.
Measles and mumps, and chicken pox too.
Clean this, cook that, and do it all again.
Seniors and juniors.
They were tuning, they were swinging.
Hair today and hair tomorrow.
All dressed up.
With someplace to go.
Hand-me-downs and stepping up.
Bow ties and family ties.
Dogs, dogs, dogs. Mitzi, more sibling than pet.
Bound by East Brighton Ave on one end and Jamesville on the other, Thurber Street was part of a rapidly developing post-war neighborhood on the city's southeast side. Until the mid-60s, our backyard was a wild kingdom. You could fence the swamp out, but not the sounds. Our neighbors were noisy. And hungry. Very hungry.
That old familiar place. now just old. But I remember everything. From the time I was a little girl, I'd always wanted to be a mother. My children were my greatest treasures. The 1950s were the summer of our lives.
From moment to moment, the world moves on. It's a short line from a moment to a memory. Life is a whirlwind, a supersonic blast, where you'll never win this human race. So you better own your moment. Give it everything you've got, and hold on tight. In the long, long run, that's really all you've got. One more thing before I go. If you see any of that old gang of mine, tell them Ernie Lurie says hello, and that I'll be seeing everyone a little further down the road.
Sing a song? Alrighty. So she said, I guess I'll go. Boy began to sigh, looked up at the sky, told the moon his tale of woe. Oh, shine on, harvest moon, up in the sky. I ain't had no lovin' since January, February, June or July. Snow time ain't no time to stay outdoors and spoon. So shine on, harvest moon, for me and my gal. Boopity-doo, boop, boopity-doo. Good night, folks. Good night.